was like,
Okay, so we finished with this slide yesterday
It's pretty hot though, honestly. Yeah, things used to not say.
because we had talked about tips.
Yeah, but then you
Andrew's into us.
So
Slim Dick was 17C.
let's continue adding to the list of reasons why the aggregate demand curve might shift.
My eyes are watering. Andrew's over here.
Changes in government spending would result in a shift of the aggregate demand curve. For instance, our defense spending in the budget that was just passed went up significantly, so that will be a change in G.
what was the book called?
What?
Higher Loyalty. Oh, it's a higher loyalty. Yeah, it was on the book.
State and local
Did
spending,
you get that?
for instance, if the bond issue passes, we'll see increased spending from the school district. Roads projects, that kind of stuff. And then changes in net exports. So any of the components of GDP changing will change aggregate demand, will shift aggregate demand. So it doesn't have to be an economic boom or an economic recession here at home. It could happen in a country that trades with us, and that would change our net exports. If they're booming, they might buy more. If they're in a recession, they'll buy less.
Which is that way everyone's slowed down when that was
And foreign stock market action also can cause shifts in net exports.
Literally drink water. Yeah. Hope does that if she drinks her chocolate milk.
Practice time! So we're going to decide what happens to aggregate demand in each of these. A 10-year-old investment tax credit expires. So first thing you have to do is decide what an investment tax credit is. What do you suppose it is?
Tax break for investment.
Yes, it's a tax break for investing. So when that expires, what happens? People decrease their investment, which means a reduction in I, which means an overall reduction in Y, which means the curve will shift left. The exchange rate falls. Does that mean our dollar's worth more or less?
Less.
Okay. So what's gonna change? What's gonna change if the exchange rate falls and our dollar's worth less?
Well, you see in price of investment.
What?
Prices have gone up.
Prices of what have gone up? It costs more for us to buy imported goods, but our exported goods are cheaper overseas. So what what component of GDP changes? And how does it change? It increases because we import less and export more because our dollar's worth less.
Yeah, the exchange rate.
The exchange rate effect is right. So what does that do to the aggregate demand curve? Shifts it right. Fall in prices increases the real value of consumers' wealth. Increase what?
Consumption.
Increases consumption. Resulting in? Rightward shift of the aggregate demand curve. State governments get rid of sales tax, but now they're taxing interest, dividends, and capital gains.
That's government spending.
It is not government spending.
It's investment. Increases investment.
It's not just investment, it's also,
Consumption.
why is it consumption also?
Because you're
willing to consume more because it's not taxed.
Oh,
Sales taxes are gone, so now you have,
more money.
right, because that effectively decreases the price of goods, correct?
And
So consumption's gonna go up,
But investment goes
but investment will go down. So your answer might be indeterminate, not indeterminable, that's not, indeterminate, because you don't have enough information. Or you might assume no change, because isn't any change that the government makes in taxation, don't they want it to be neutral? So you might say, no change or indeterminate. Let's see what the book says. Were we right?
Yeah.
Why is
Yay,
I
us. Huh?
Why is that I like italicized?
Because it's supposed to be.
Are we supposed to write it like that?
You can't write italics.
I mean, like write it like that.
So underline it, just like that.
What did we say on this one?
If it goes right.
Why? Oh yeah. All right. What did we say?
It's just like, oh, consumption increases.
Yeah.
It's a shift along the curve. Why?
Oh, because it's price.
Because it's a change in price.
They
We
had
shift
to
along
throw
the
that in
curve.
there.
You suckers.
Which they did, right? They did say this was gonna be the hardest. Might as well throw it.
Does everybody understand that one?
What about investment?
That's not all.
I don't know why they didn't figure investment in this one.
Sure.
Because savings would decrease, thus restricting investment. All right, Hannah, you wanted to do supply. Here it is.
Aww.
You knew it was coming.
Huh?
Okay, so this chapter is the supply is still us. Or is it businesses and like,
It's all businesses.
so we can, it's like, I don't remember what chapter it was. We were the suppliers, like labor and stuff like that.
When it's labor, you are the supplier.
So does that mean we're included in this? Is it like all,
Goods and services? No, because that's the labor market in particular. This is goods and services.
okay.
Upward sloping in the short run, and then remember, this is SRAS, short run aggregate supply. Some of you who like to draw micro, tiny graphs are going to be unable to continue your tiniest of graphs in this chapter, because there's going to be too many lines and too many labels for you to do that. You'll make them you'll make them unreadable. What'd you say? I don't want to keep yawning.
I thought they knew energy.
Hannah's pushing drugs on me.
It's not drugs, it's a supplement.
Yeah, there's a difference.
That sounds so much better.
One of them's
Roids.
legal, one of them's not.
Dude, roids are bad.
You're
They're stimulants. You do right.
I don't think Roy. Oh my god.
He actually does.
Oh my god.
Yeah, he has like.
Long run aggregate supply is vertical in the long run. Why would long run aggregate supply be inelastic?
Well, because.
No, we threw out neutrality of money, remember? It's part of classical economics.
Yeah.
Ah, but what does neutrality of money have to do with long run aggregate supply? Mark?
It won't shift the price level, but
What's that got to do with long run aggregate supply?
I have no clue.
You're on the
You're
way.
trying, trying to draw
Wait,
connections.
so
Is it because
wait, so price is gonna change with the Y. Does that mean that in the long run, price change doesn't affect GDP?
What is
So let's go over this. The natural rate of output is what determines long run aggregate supply. You write that Y sub N. Y sub N. GDP, natural rate of output. Okay. When unemployment is at its natural rate, and remember for us, we hope that that's around 3 to 4%, right? It includes only that structural unemployment and a little bit of cyclical. Okay, so it's that natural rate of unemployment that's going to determine our natural rate of output for GDP, and that is where we set our long-run aggregate supply. You can also call Y sub N full employment output, because we know that we've achieved full unemployment when we hit the natural rate, full employment when we hit the natural rate of unemployment. Particularly in economies that are rarely at their natural rate of unemployment, they like to call Y sub N potential output, because it's what they're hoping to someday output, to achieve eventually.
It's like 10.
What?
It's like 10.
You knew this was coming, right? The explanations. So if Y sub N is determined based on capital stocks and labor and natural resources, etc., do any of those change based on the price level?
Wait, but how do you, what's like a stock of natural, is it like how much you have?
The economy stocks of labor. So how many people live, how many people are alive and in the labor market? How much capital is available? How many natural resources do you have? Yes?
So this probably will not intersect with somebody's short run aggregate supply and short run aggregate demand.
It will. You're about to see it. We're building the components.
Okay, so it's
So we're gonna have
Those are
3 lines
fixed.
on our graph. is what
Those
you're
things.
saying.
They're relatively fixed. They don't vary based upon the price level. There are X amount of oil deposits and gold deposits and coal deposits and copper deposits in the ground. And no matter how much the copper and oil and whatever is worth, that's how much there is.
Oh, so price can't affect it.
Okay?
Get the car key.
There you go.
I need to get an umbrella.
literally that's all I'm gonna say. What's up, what's next? Yeah, how you feeling?
So when it might shift, and that is a shift of the entire curve.
You have the concessions.
Yeah.
Bottles. Make it rain. Oh god. Ew. Oh.
Yeah,
stop.
That's in my market.
Remember, if so, the YN is based on our capital stocks of labor, technology, natural resources, etc. So we add a whole bunch of labor. We open up our immigration policy and immigrants come in. That happens, what are we going to do to Y sub N?
We're gonna
Increase it. New technology becomes available, and now instead of just drilling for oil and natural gas, we're able to frack frack the crust and get more out, what happens to Y sub n? Right. All of a sudden, solar and battery technology improves tenfold, and we're able to capture every bit of energy from the sun and store it in the new ultra powerful long life batteries. What happens to Y sub n?
Goes to
Right, it increases because we've got new technology. Okay, we discover a new element that we hadn't known before. We add something to the periodic table, and we begin mining for it because now we know it's there. Right.
I'm gonna find it.
What happens when we can't get any more oil out of the Earth's crust?
Man, that thing's gonna go
And
way
no
out.
matter what the technology says, we just can't get it. What happens to Y sub n?
That's going straight to the left,
Going to the left.
way left.
Right. What happens to Y sub n a month after the zombie apocalypse?
It's gone.
Yeah, well, I don't think we're talking about econ then.
It's significantly to the left because of a change in
People.
labor.
I don't know.
Just make zombies work
Hey,
for you.
who was that guy that said we should harness the zombie power? He wore a boot on his head, ran for president. Don't know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
All right.
We
Wait, will
should
you go back
harness
for 2
zombie
seconds?
power.
Excuse me.
Zoom time.
No?
Kinda like this.
Just for 2 seconds, I didn't get the label right.
Yeah,
This one is.
Is that-
My chair. I don't think you need to.
Do your new
Okay,
one,
yeah,
so
yeah,
your
yeah.
new one labeled Y.
They use prime. I would label them 1 and 2 as well for consistency's sake. All right. So your labor can also decrease. Maybe not a zombie apocalypse, but by the time all of the baby boomers retire, people have been having fewer children, and so we're going to see our labor numbers down unless we change our immigration policy
Wait, so does that mean we'll get a lot more?
or get more fertile. But even
Or
then,
get more
how
fertile.
long does it take to make those babies into contribers to L?
9 months.
Education.
Yeah, it
9
takes some
months.
time.
I'm out of the room ready.
Hannah, so your baby
Take
comes
like
out, why do you wear?
It's very significant.
Yes.
Maybe government policies reduce the natural unemployment rate.
Put some Miracle Grow on them. I don't know.
What are K and H? It's been a while since we thought about K and H.
Physical capital.
Physical capital and human capital. So we build more factories. We build bigger equipment. We colonize space and Mars and the moon. Or we improve human capital, more people get college degrees, or more people complete job training programs, or more people go to trade school. Or we blow some factories down in a hurricane. Or we hit some factories on a Friday afternoon with heavy hail and a tornado, and then turn around and bury them in a blizzard the next day.
So it's Friday.
Hashtag Nebraska weather.
I thought that's where that was heading.
Wait, why?
We could change our natural resources. We might discover those new minerals. We might stop importing oil, or we might find that we just can't get oil anymore. This one is one that you saw change as whales became overfished in the 1800s. Whale oil was the way that you went before they'd found kerosene and crude oil in the refining process. As whales were being overfished, you saw a scarcity of oil available.
Whales.
Ha! I don't know why this one would be, something we might consider with snow on April 13th. I didn't get to go out to dinner the night of my junior prom because we spent the dinner time and missed our reservation in the basement during a tornado warning.
Seriously?
Yep.
That'd be honestly,
Okay,
that'd be a good
that's
story.
Ned was so ticked at my mom because the radar wasn't as good back then, but it was still pretty good, and we could tell that the tornado was out in Millard, and dinner was supposed to be downtown. And
You don't look at your individual.
he was like, forget this, I'm going home, I'll come back after the warning's lifted, I'm not sitting here with you and your mom.
Told you I'd be back.
Is that for me?
Is that for all of us?
What? Jesus.
Bringing that in and you're not even
Pulled out
gonna
the
share it.
Okay, there's a rule though, when you leave and you're in class.
I say we vote to reduce the amount of labor in the workforce by eliminating one.
We have old.
You did violate the first rule of hope.
Yeah.
You better at least give her
Everybody gets a
some.
piece. First rule of hooks, what?
If
You leave and you come back and you don't
you're
bring the
gonna
ice
have to
cream.
put stuff back.
It's an ugly situation.
You better at
Where's
least
my
give
ice
her
cream?
Bring her ice cream.
Yeah, you
told me I'd bring you ice cream.
That's a rule.
That's
Box
the
of doom.
first thing. I've never
Box
seen
of
anybody
doom.
bring ice cream. Hannah, don't ask for them. You get it upon yourself, and you don't want to have to do it on prom night.
Alright, we can improve technology.
So what, can you give me the top side?
Gorditos?
Or I suppose we could theoretically forget technology or be unable to utilize our technology. Zombie apocalypse.
Forget about
kind
it.
harness zombie energy. Telling them.
No.
Alright,
This dude was a genius.
we just built a giant treadmill for them to constantly keep
I'm
on.
gonna go there. Wait, I'm
Oh,
doing
building, they will
I know
come.
where you live. Somewhere in Baldwin.
Or like those things that harness the waves in the ocean, the things that on the ocean bed they harness the waves, so you put up fences like that to get the zombies as they're just walking.
Vermin Supreme.
Too bad.
Has anyone heard of Vermin?
Alrighty. So here we have long run aggregate supply and aggregate demand in 1990. Over time, long run aggregate supply shifts to the right.
You guys, I'm reading about him right now. He was elected.
Growth in the money supply. This is why inflation is necessary, guys. Look at 2010 there. There would be no price level if aggregate demand didn't also increase. You see that? You have to have that intersection. 2000 would have been an ugly situation. There are no prices. Everything's free because aggregate demand didn't increase. But we increase the money supply and thus increase aggregate demand. And there you see that the price level just continues to rise then over time.
Dude, just keep reading.
Some of them are Doritos.
I say we jump them. There's only one of him.
Now when I fight, I feel like there's
Yeah, free pony for everyone if Vermin Supreme was elected. And he would pass a federal law that makes it illegal not to brush your teeth.
Okay, so there's your price level changes and your changes in GDP.
And he would elect.
Follow this. All good? Now to the short run aggregate supply.
He would elect a secretary of town.
It's upward sloping. Over time, increases in price cause an increase in the quantity of goods and services supplied in the short run.
Wait, can you go back?
I usually go back upstairs. Smells.
I think you should watch what I put up on the internet.
You put them on the internet? I thought I was the only one people were gone, and nobody's gone. I don't know.
Do you not see Casey?
There are 3 other people
Casey.
Oh, and Nolan. Oh.
Hey.
Wow.
Hey.
Oh,
Kids
and
are right there.
Aiden.
Oh, that one kid.
Aiden's not gone.
Ah, shucks.
Oh, Hayden. I thought you said Aiden.
I was like,
Wow,
Dayton's
and
not-
when they watch this, they'll know that it's Dayton Gettings who either didn't know who they were or didn't notice that they were gone, and
Well,
they'll
we
be
didn't-
hurt.
We didn't care that Hayden Fittens was gone, but that's
We
fine.
miss you.
Not Hayden.
She just opened
That's
my
Hannah.
But she just opened.
All right.
Oh, is it?
Hannah, there's a bus.
Wait, what's the time in here so I can make sure to tell Hayden to watch?
Good response. Look, look, look.
HI. Low.
JK.
Price is high, price is low.
I don't know.
Dude, said why would I be?
So read this and think. I can give you lots of information, but I can't think about it for you. And thinking is the only way you can understand.
Staring at your soul. Let's
Wait, listen, what if like there was a change in like consumption?
Well, a change in consumption would be a change in,
It would be a change in AD or what? It would be in long run, right?
so you'd shift that whole curve.
But I thought you'd also shift AD. I know it's a change in consumption. So like, it says that fluctuations in AD don't cause any fluctuations in employment. Then what happens if like consumption goes
In
down?
the long run.
Oh. Dang.
Alright, we're gonna start with the really good part on Monday where we put all three curves together on the same graph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers.